we're live. All right, so this is Data Science Deployed. I think we're on episode 9 or 10. And today we are going to talk about computer vision with LabelStudio with my co-hosts Ben Cook and Donny Winston. So Ben, I know you're using LabelStudio in a project like currently, which is not something that I can quite say. So why don't you head us off with what you're using LabelStudio for and a bit about how that's all working out for you.
Yeah, so I'm new to LabelStudio, but have been doing annotation for computer vision for a long time. And I guess just by way of introduction to the value of LabelStudio, at my previous gig, we rolled our own data annotation tool. And there were some nice things about that, like total control over the annotation interface, but there were a ton of headaches. Just, you've got to like host the web application, you've got to think about authentication, you've got to store all the annotations, and every new problem you have to solve from scratch. And these are all problems that are essentially solved. And we're a machine learning engineering team, capable software developers, but not really experts in building web applications. So LabelStudio basically provides the ability to run a fairly like world-class web application for annotations without being an expert in all the details of it. So yeah, now I am using LabelStudio currently for one project, although I'm expecting that to ramp up fairly quickly. And it's great. I deployed it to AWS. I was able to put a domain in front of it with HTTPS. The customer just thinks it's great. They log into a dedicated domain. It's all secure. Images and video or images and annotations go straight to S3, like read from S3, and then annotations are written to S3. And I think so far it's a really good experience. It's you have a lot of like configurability about how you set up these jobs. The API is really good, so you can sort of write commands programmatically instead of going through the UI. And they have an amazing Slack community, so it's very easy to get support, answer questions. So yeah, I'm pretty bullish. So far, I'm just using the open source version of it, although I know they have an enterprise version with extra features, and that's something that is potentially interesting as well. So yeah, I think it's a great way to solve the annotation problem without having to build it from scratch.
Yeah, I definitely want to +1 the Slack community. I've been using LabelStudio for a little bit, although not quite as much recently because I haven't been on so many computer vision projects lately. But I know when I first started using it, I was having like some kind of issue and I was really breaking my brain over it. And I went on the Slack community and asked about it. And I had like a pull request with the, with the commit message and everything that answered my question right in there. And I think like 5 or 10 minutes, it was ridiculous. So yeah, they're all really, really friendly. And they seem to take sort of like, community kind of input and questions and things quite seriously. So that's always really nice to have. Did you guys watch the webinar from this last weekend? I'll make sure to link to that in the show notes.
I didn't watch it. I wonder if you could give us the TLDR.
Oh, it was showing how to integrate LabelStudio with this tool called, I think it's called ActiveLoop.ai, which I think is supposed to be a little bit like this tool called data version control that we were talking about a few weeks ago. But essentially, it's this idea of creating version data sets, but it integrates quite nicely with LabelStudio. And then I guess it has like also some kind of performance boost as well that it like because it's smart. So when it's like reading and writing data, it caches and does things cleverly and all that sort of thing. But it was also very interesting because more and more I'm seeing these kind of hosted services, I guess, because, cloud and storage and everything like that has gotten so much cheaper, where it's like, why would I bother hosting this? I'm going to go host this on, on I think it's called ActiveLoop. I'll make sure to check that and put it in the show notes. Where I'm not sure if it's the whole, I don't think it's the data set. You still store the data set itself in your own S3, but maybe like metadata or the roles or permissions or something like that, or you just sign up for an account with them. I'm not completely sure what the deal is because I haven't used it, but I just thought that was really interesting to see, like yet another case of let's have this code, not even something that I install locally. It's like code as a service. So I just thought that was really interesting. So they went through instance segmentation using this ActiveLoop project with LabelStudio And actually, the guys from LabelStudio sent it to me in the Slack chat because they know that's what I do, is the instance segmentation stuff. So I felt very famous on the internet for like a good minute there.
That's cool. Yeah, I haven't watched that webinar either, but I'd like to get to it. Ben, I'm interested in what you mentioned about configurability to set up jobs and an API. So I'm kind of wondering, okay, it sounds easy to get something up in front of people in the browser and they do a bunch of stuff, but then what? What does the data look like? Do you kind of have to read the API and understand how things are? Do they align with any other existing standards or data formats for annotation to play well with other tools? Like how do you then go from that annotation step to something else, and how interpretable is that data as is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they, out of the box, they have multiple different export formats. I think by default it's stored in JSON on your file storage, either like S3 or whatever like cloud storage you want. But they definitely do have some kind of compatibility with some standard formats. So like Cocoa format is kind of popular for object detection. And I can't say I don't fully understand basically like what's the supported way to go from this JSON format that they use to Cocoa or some other like standard format. But I think my understanding is there's a fairly straightforward way to get there through the tool. And the other thing that I know they have is webhooks. So you can hook into specific events and then trigger some other API that you set up when that event occurs. So that's another area that I've not really explored yet, but I think is a pretty powerful concept. Like, every time a new task gets annotated, I want to trigger some job to sort of like compare it against my model, or update my data set, with some other job. Personally, I like that it's just JSON on S3. So, the rest of my work is in Amazon and AWS. So it's very straightforward to grab those JSON files, snapshot the data set with something like DVC, and then it's right there for training and other stuff I want to do. The other thing I know they have is that I have not explored, but I think is a pretty powerful concept, is a explicit machine learning integration. So this idea of active learning of like, okay, I tag a handful of examples, I train my model. Now I sort of like run inference on a bunch of new images and pre-populate all the annotations, and then have a human just go through and correct those. It's like that correction step is so much faster than tagging something from scratch. And they're really sort of like designing for that scenario, I think. So again, I'm basically an amateur, like doing just like the simplest possible workflow right now. But my impression is they've thought of a lot of sort of important scenarios for doing this at scale, and they're sort of like building with those things in mind.
Okay, yeah. The reason I'm thinking about that is recently I've come across this. When you mentioned setting up jobs, there's this effort called the Open Lineage specification that a bunch of tools are using to try and coordinate around the terminology of jobs and job runs and data sets and versions of them, and trying to plug into things like Airflow and dbt and Dagster and various things. And I'm also aware of, just in the annotation space, there are things like the W3C annotation standard that some people use. So regardless of what actual on-disk thing, whether it's JSON or XML or whatever, just in terms of actual vocabularies that are used, so that, for example, you're doing something with Airflow and that has a bunch of jobs, and then LabelStudio has a bunch of jobs, and it all maybe goes through this open lineage thing, and you can just view on a tool like what data sets were done what, and just that sort of thing, rather than just kind of like a local vocabulary. So I was just wondering if there was anything like that with LabelStudio. There might be. I mean, you're sort of just diving into it, but when I deal with a lot of like tool interactions with different different data science activities, I've been paying a little more attention to how things kind of harmonize.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because otherwise you'll just have a lot of point-to-point ETL with a lot of solutions, which it sounds like that's maybe the general case with LabelStudio. You kind of get the output format, you read the documentation about what the field means, and you write an ETL script to get it into whatever analysis tool you want. But yeah, it's interesting about that.
Yeah, I did want to just kind of point out, they do have a tool to at least convert among the formats that I use pretty heavily. I think I did like the default throw it in JSON format when I was using it. And when I used it for a project, all these other features weren't quite as like well established, because I think it was before the 1.0 release. So they have like a tool that can convert between the different formats. And what I did was I just used Airflow in the background, but that's just kind of might be me, and like when in doubt, I just throw Airflow at stuff. And then I had it just, like pooling for these different files. And I think I did something kind of silly, like when I was labeling things, I had like a complete or invalid tag on there too that was just a checkbox. So then after it was like, okay, we find 20 of these images that are labeled and they're complete and they're validated, that then it would start a new training job, because I found the job queue, at least when I was using it anyways, wasn't well suited towards like a very large training job, which I was using this for high content screening images, which tend to be, quite large. So I still wanted to have the hooks to kind of send that elsewhere, but I did find, with LabelStudio, I could do that. So I do think it has the capability that you can train in-house, or you can go hook it up to something else, either with the webhooks or just, interacting with the database. I'm very into this like open API schema lately that you can get from everything, that then you can like use that, and then you can use the open API generator to like generate you code absolutely everywhere else. So then you can generate, different SDKs for different languages, and then you can just, like use that to call like all of your other stuff. Like, so for example, Airflow has one now, they have their own open API specification. Strappy is another one that I've been getting into. Superset has it too. So all my tools now, like they're all using the open API specification, and then I can just run around and, just compile the code to different SDKs and things. But yeah, you can definitely do all that with LabelStudio too.
I want to harp on that too. Ben was mentioning, one of the key benefits of LabelStudio for him is that you don't have to do web development. You can sort of deploy this tool
that's
based that's based in the browser, and people can essentially create the data, do what they need to do. And I definitely see that also with the Open API. So I've deployed, tools built with Python's Fast API that expose an Open API, and they kind of have the Swagger front end. And people who don't want to use programmatic, stuff, I can train them to just use that automatic front end. Here's how you authorize. Here's how you click to enter in this endpoint, and each of the parameters. If it's an enum, it'll have a drop down. You can enter a string here, and so it's really nice. It's kind of a very minimal UI, not very user friendly necessarily, but you can train someone on it, and it's there, and it's in the browser. So that's kind of another benefit of this kinds of thing, and having a standard like that. If it's an open API, someone else can work on that front end and develop that Swagger front end and do it. So that's great. Yeah.
So Ben, what are you labeling with your labeling project?
Yeah.
I think we need to hear about this.
Yeah, I'm labeling cow heads. So basically the end goal is facial recognition for cows, and that ties into a bigger system. But to do facial recognition, you need identities, and it's that's sort of an interesting problem, because basically you can use a combination of where the cow is and the tag on their ear, but a lot of times the tag is not visible. The tag changes from location to location. So basically it's a multi-step thing. Like right now we're getting all the heads, and we're going to train an object detector to find cow heads, and then we'll track those cow heads and create little cropped videos The other problem I didn't say is that the way they'll collect these videos is they'll drive down a feed bunk. So they'll stick a camera out the truck and just drive down the feed bunk while the cows are sticking their heads through and eating this feed. And so you get videos with a bunch of cows in them, and we want to create still images of individual cows with known identities. So yeah, basically right now we cut out heads, get sort of like boxes of the heads. Then we'll train a head tracker and create little like cropped videos of individual cows. And if you get a view of the tag, then you can identify who's that cow. And then you get the whole video of sort of like cutouts that you can use as images to train the facial recognition system. So yeah, multi-step thing. And that, yeah, like that's makes it important to have somewhat of a flexible annotation system, because right now we're doing heads, but soon it's going to be like, look at this video and figure out what the ID of that cow is. Yeah.
Cool. Sounds like an interesting problem, at least.
It is
I like
interesting.
problems
Yeah.
that have like a couple steps to them.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering about how does LabelStudio facilitate, like where does LabelStudio end and other things begin? Like kind of like what is its wheelhouse or has been for you, and what are the things maybe it's capable of, or maybe not, but there are definitely kind of things that happen outside of it. Just to get a bit more sense of like if your whole process, maybe through the example that you just talked about, you know, what parts of that are sort of like, okay, now someone goes to LabelStudio and then they exit. Yeah. So I'm kind of worried about kind of, not worried. I'm interested in kind of what part of the life cycle, you know.
Yeah, I think so again, I'll like disclaimer that I'm sort of an amateur with LabelStudio, but basically the way I'm thinking about it is it's both sort of task management for human labelers, and it is hosting the UI for actually labeling those images or videos. And I think it can do other things, but I'm comfortable using other tools for the rest of the development lifecycle, at least at this point. So yeah, but it's pretty cool that you can do multiple steps in that process, because like I need humans at multiple stages of this project. Like I need humans to help me find heads of the cows. Then I'm gonna automatically create a bunch of these like cropped videos, and I need humans to go through and watch and say, oh yeah, that's tag 1734. This is tag 5432, and like both of those sort of like interface for humans to help me figure out what this data says. Yeah, that I think is the sort of like central wheelhouse of LabelStudio. The like, yeah, critical feature.
Yeah, are there things that kind of, I guess, based on your users' experience, like that were like the default out of the box UI experience of LabelStudio, you kind of want to customize, or like maybe can I just change this little thing, and like are there hooks into that, or or is it sort of like, well, I need to fork the code base and maintain a fork? Like how have you encountered that kind of idea where like this tool is great, but now I want to change it a little bit? So like what is the relationship between the size of your conceptual change in your mind to the size of the actual kind of change and implementation challenge to get that out?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And my ideal tool would allow me to write my own React components and create completely custom tagging jobs. You know, when you're tagging 1 million images, you care about fractions of a second in terms of efficiency and how fast it goes. And that's definitely something that I saw that as an advantage of rolling our own annotation tool at my previous gig. It was sort of like the cons outweighed the pros in that case, because we had to do all this other maintenance and support that was not value add. But I think like simple things like, okay, I want the cursor to be a crosshairs instead of a pointer, and I want to extend a little like light gray line to the sort of extremes of the image with the cursor, so you can see where the box is going to land. And these like tiny little UI patterns that can actually make a big difference in terms of speed for your tagging team. Definitely LabelStudio gives you some customization. So they've got this XML format that allows you to sort of like mix and match tags for the sort of like sample input. So you can have like audio or video or images or text or whatever, and then some kind of like input tag for, you know, freeform text or selection or bounding boxes or whatever. So I think definitely there's ability to mix and match those things. You also, one of the inputs can be HTML. So in principle, that could be an iframe to a YouTube video or something else. What I don't know, I would love to be wrong about this, but I don't think is possible is for me to write my own React component as a plugin and sort of like somehow import that into the tagging job. So I don't get full flexibility of what does that tagging job look like. I hope I'm wrong about that. I think that would be an amazing feature. I think otherwise, I think if you want to write custom jobs, I think basically you'd have to fork the front end. It's open source, so you're free to do that, but you give up some of the benefit of, I don't have to actually maintain this system if you do that. Yeah.
Well, I know one potential solution, I don't know how much of a solution this is specifically with LabelStudio because I haven't done it, is this idea of using like a single backend and then adding different, in Flask, they're called like different routers. So you could have like, you know, backend / app1, backend / app2, and they could have completely different front ends, right? Like they don't, you know, one could have the typical Flask, the Jinja templates and the static HTML and all that kind of thing. And then the other one could be like an Angular page that's being spun up and all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, I want to say that's still a possibility that you could
That's
just
true.
have like
Just
a
use the
Docker image
API.
that calls, yeah, that just, you know, so get a Docker image, call the, I think the backend of LabelStudio was written in Django, have like the default view that it has with the React front end, and then also to just have like an additional view that's maybe even being served separately or something like that. That's completely your own front end. I don't know though,
That's a
because
really good point.
I haven't like really tried it. I've only used the XML stuff. But you could. I've been doing that lately because, as you know, web development is not my wheelhouse, and I have some, you know, and there was like some things I was like, oh, I just need one, you know, like one like customized page here. I don't want to throw out the whole front end for, you know, just to have like this one page. So I wound up like throwing it on as like /app or something. And then I don't know, I managed to get like the cookies and stuff set up, although that was like a mission for me so that the authentication stayed the same and stuff like that. So I think you can do that. And I mean, they do have their front end. It is just an NPM package.
Yeah.
So my feeling is that you could get it and then like it would have different components in there, but
I think that's a good point. I didn't think about
totally
that.
Sure.
Yeah. I like you mentioned something like that, and I didn't connect the dots until you just said like, oh yeah, just use their backend and write your own front end or extend their own front end. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I'm looking, so like you know, because I can't help myself, I went and I actually looked at their GitHub for the LabelStudio front end, and it is an NPM package. And then within there, they do have the SRC components. And I mean, like it looks like their components are pretty well separated. So, I don't know. I mean, yeah, again, I haven't tried to build anything customized, and I don't have really any intentions of building any front end custom web code ever. But I think you could, theoretically.
Yeah, you totally could. That's a really good point.
So there you go, Ben. That's your project.
Thank
And
you.
you can report back to us next week. Tell us all how it went. Yeah, I found it really interesting, the LabelStudio thing, because what I was doing was, so initially before I found LabelStudio, the only solution that I found that did a good job with the giving like an annotation interface to my end users was this. It was like a Python GUI called LabelImage, and it was really good for what it did, but it was a GUI, which meant that I had to do desktop support. And I don't know if I've talked about how I feel about desktop support, but I don't want to have to do it. So, so like there was that. And then also these images that we were dealing with were quite large. So then it was like, I had to go do more desktop support because they were on like an NFS file store. And then I had to go and like mount them to people's desktop computers so that they could go and access and do labeling. And then you had people like clobbering each other because there was no, like roles and integration and all that. So it was like a lot of like IT maintenance for me, which I find that if you have a web application, it just gets rid of so much of that because it's like, whatever. You can still have NFS, but you can have, you can have like role-based authentication on top of that, or you just have like one place that you're managing all that from, which I find to be very helpful in, like if you're in like a support staff kind of role, like I used to be. Are you doing any of that, Ben? Are you managing like a team of people who are labeling, different image sets, and everybody has sort of like, you do 1 through 10, and so person A does 1 through 10, and person B does 11 through 20, and so on and so forth? Or
yeah, so we're doing that in a very simple way right now. So my client has a team of interns basically, and a bunch of people are just kind of going from a single list and tagging through it. We, in my previous roles, we used to manage those with just spreadsheets. So lots and lots of Google Sheets and links to individual tasks. And actually, it's a little bit hacky, but I actually don't mind spreadsheets as a way to do that because it's so flexible, and like you get a little bit of automation in terms of sort of assigning groups of jobs to different people, randomization, but you don't have to have the perfect job management tool. So yeah, I think like that would actually work nicely in this scenario because each task has its own URL. So you could create a spreadsheet of URLs and then assign, okay, I want, person A to do this block of tasks and this person B to do this block. Because we're tagging a small amount for this first pass, we haven't messed with that yet, but I imagine that is something I or the team will be looking at pretty seriously in the near future.
Oh, well, I know you definitely can, because I had one of the guys on my team knew Django really well, which is the back end. And so if you know it really well, it's quite extensible. And so then you can go in there, and I think you pretty easily added in like the like role-based authentication, or adding in like an additional data set or something like that, or like a grouping for the data sets that was then assigned to people. I don't remember what the exact solution was, but it was something like that. It was quite similar.
Yeah, I worked on a Django system, and I can plus one the extensibility of that sort of thing. I don't know if it would apply in this case, but in general, there's this idea of a Django app, and like the whole administrative interface is an app, and so you can just add. You can have one or more Django apps in a given Django project, which is the actual website that you deploy, and a lot of them can interact with each other. And that was really nice. I was doing something, and there was a Django app for that, and it basically gave me a bunch of backend routes, and it managed its own database tables, and I could hook into those models and do stuff with it. So that's always a possibility. That's cool. And I like the systems that can do that. Yeah, I was just thinking a bit about that. Like those kinds of systems seem really nice for just the kind of work we do, or where we kind of want to build things, but not have to build too much and have to build from scratch. Like you mentioned, you sort of know, you can work at a given level of sophistication. Like I know how to do a React component. If I can work at that level, compose those, that's great. But if I have to start all the way at the bottom of a blank HTML page and let's import React and let's do all this stuff, it gets a little hard. And yeah, I think that's a way to go for a lot of things. I imagine LabelStudio wasn't designed as like a component toolkit for building annotation UIs,
Yeah.
But
That's
that's the sort of thing that that can have a lot of power. I'm reminded by analogy. I just want to throw this in there because I remembered it. In trying to wonder how planetary motion worked, Copernicus had all these complicated theory that was built out of circular paths, and things were really complicated. But then once Kepler built on like a more sophisticated building block, rather than circles, you could consider elliptical orbits. Then all of a sudden the math became a lot simpler because you could construct something with a slightly more sophisticated building block. And so I noticed that with a lot of things where it's like, I don't necessarily want to add a click handler at the JavaScript level for this particular thing and like really go down at the very bottom level. I want to sort of work at a higher level. I mean, the interesting thing as programmers, I don't know if I have an electrical engineering background, and it's almost like as programmers, we can always pick up the soldering iron and just start adding a new circuit component. And we don't always want to work at that level. But that's where a lot of the danger comes in, because it can be convenient if you know a little JavaScript. You take a whole interface and you're like, oh, I just want to change the cursor to be that. Let me find the line of code where that happens, and I'll just change that thing. And it's like, oh boy, I just rewired something. But we kind of want to avoid that.
Yeah, totally.
Sorry, a bit of a non sequitur there, but hopefully unrelated to our topic.
No, yeah, I agree. I think
customizing tools and wanting to build on them that have great functionality and not wanting to reinvent things.
I think like, given that I don't want to reinvent things, the question then is like, what's the right level of abstraction for me to work at with any given tool? So like, yeah, with LabelStudio as a great example, maybe I should just be content with the object detection UI that they give me, and not worry about the minute interaction patterns. I think it's a constant balance to get it right.
Right. The more you default
it's so
to it,
hard.
yeah,
it's so tempting to be like, oh, look at this thing. I can totally just go and customize it and write a whole new thing, but then you have to maintain the thing, and that tends to be where
right.
It all kind of comes down
maintain,
for me, at least. And
document, yeah.
Explain it to other people, debug it when things go wrong. Yeah, I've been very much challenging myself lately to niche down even more on my tech stack. I thought that I was already, and then I had to maintain stuff, and it turns out that I wasn't. So,
I think that is a hard problem with computer vision. I'm sure it's true in other sub-disciplines as well, but it's hard to niche down. Like you do need annotation, and that's basically web development, and you do need sort of serious training with GPU instances, and that's sort of like cloud infrastructure problems. And you need a deep learning framework, and that's like can be fairly detailed Python software writing. And it's hard to say like, okay, this is the tech that I'm really going to focus on. If you want to build a good computer vision application, you kind of have to span a lot of different technologies.
Yeah, I found that to be the case for really any data science or machine learning technology. You need just you have to tackle the data from so many different viewpoints. We were talking about that before the call, where I was like, well, I want a data visualization pipeline that goes along every step of a next generation sequencing pipeline, and be able to look at the data from like any given angle, at any point in its analysis. And then, so you have to have that, and then you have to have and that's just like sort of like a view of just raw data, right? That's not even doing any analysis or any interpretation or annotation or like what we were talking about, setting up permissions or anything like that. So once you get a lot of data, I think your life gets more complicated, more interesting too, but also more complicated.
Yeah, more fun, but more complicated.
Yes.
Yeah, and this harkens back to what I was asking about earlier with the data formatting and maybe what vocabulary it uses. And I've been increasingly enamored with the idea of data centricity, and the idea that applications might come and go, and like if at all possible, you don't want your data to just be a given application's external RAM, you know, where you kind of have to like understand the application in order to understand that stuff on disk. Yeah, because then you can sort of, you know, take it or leave it, a given annotation application, to transition to a new annotation application, because the data is just all, it's how computer vision annotation data is stored, you know. Yep. So whether you use LabelStudio or whatever, it shouldn't matter. And it's a difficult proposition, but again, yeah, because tech stacks like change and everything, yeah, I'm increasingly interested in sort of that, for the same reason that Jillian mentioned. If you have like a large pipeline where you have lots of different applications touching the data, you want to visualize it every step. You know, the one common denominator there is the data, and so it's really nice if each of those applications can kind of pick into this one data store and do stuff, and then drop new information back into that data store that another application can then pick up. And so kind of the data is the center thing, rather than, yeah, lots of ETL from one application's format to another. And I don't know how we'll get there with a lot of things, but I'm definitely, in terms of decreasing technical debt and integration debt, I'm interested in looking at tools that are not just open source, but that use these open protocols and models in an attempt to play well with others. But it's I don't know, it's an interesting thing. What are some other alternatives in this space that maybe you considered or looking at, other than LabelStudio, that may be involved in some sort of standardized effort for computer vision annotation data or something like that? Yeah, are there any other tools that play well with LabelStudio?
The only other one I used that I really intensely looked at was this tool called LabelImage, which was the desktop GUI written in Python with, I think, like PyQt or one of those frameworks. And it was great. I mean, it did everything that I wanted for it to do. I even put in like a feature request to the developer, and he answered it in like a day or something like that. So it was really good, and it did do exactly what I wanted for it to do, and I was even able to customize it a little bit pretty quickly and things like that. The only other one that I'm seeing come up is I'm starting to see Dash put some like computer vision annotation functionality up, but I haven't personally seen anything quite that I think of as quite as full featured as LabelStudio. So like with LabelStudio, for example, I don't really think of myself as having to do application development. When I was using it, I did have to feed it that configuration of like, these are the different types of annotations. So, this is the image, and these are the different things that we could be looking for within the image. And then like how to set up the UI in terms of like, I want for this this column to be this wide and to have this many rows and that kind of thing. I don't really consider that to be application development, although, the line does get kind of fuzzy, whereas with Dash, it doesn't seem like they've built it out enough yet that it's really something like that I can say, okay, this is going to be my computer vision labeling annotation platform. I don't know if they have plans for anything to do that. I did play with some of their, they have quite nice galleries and things if you just go to their website and you can play around with it. And it was nice. I did like it. What about you, Ben? What else did you, what other tools did you evaluate?
I'm not aware of any other really strong open source tools that are flexible and sort of close to match the features of LabelStudio. The other tools I've evaluated are proprietary. Just basically they expose it as a SaaS. Labelbox is one that I think is pretty good, and I've heard good things about V7, although I haven't actually personally evaluated it. Yeah, and I think those are good options. I think they're good ways to tie those to a labeling workforce. Yeah, we were talking about the right level of abstraction. I want like slightly lower level access than just like, a username and password. But I think those are pretty good options.
Cool. Just to throw in one thing that I haven't used personally, But I know about it. I don't know, through there's this natural language processing library in Python that's quite popular called Spacey, and there's a company that does a lot of that has the main developers on it. It's called Explosion.ai, and they have this tool called Prodigy, which is an annotation tool, and it does look like they do computer vision stuff as well, images as well as labels. But I haven't gotten into any like output formats or anything. But I'm kind of wondering, if anyone has sort of done that, like tried to label things with one or the other and like combined them. But I could definitely see that as being an important thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't tried.
No, me neither. Recently, all that I've really used is LabelStudio, and I've been happy enough with it that I just keep using that.
Yep.
Oh, I know. I don't think we talked about it, but I do know that LabelStudio also does some language processing features. I don't do that like at all, so I have really no idea what that's about, but it's there in case anybody is like, why aren't we talking about it? Because we don't know, or at least I don't know. I haven't used it for that. I've only ever used it for the computer vision tools. Yeah, you don't know either? Okay. I was actually working when last semester for the STEM away students, they were doing like a natural language processing, going over like research papers or something like that. I'll have to ask them what they used. Okay, but I think we're getting to be here at time. So do you guys have any kind of last comments to wrap up our conversation about computer vision annotation and LabelStudio?
I don't have much else to say other than I'm really grateful for the LabelStudio team, and they're doing really great work, and I'm hoping to learn more.
Yeah, I just wanted, thanks you both for talking about your experience, and I really love that it's open source. I think that's a really important thing. I just checked in this other tool I mentioned, Prodigy is not, but so I think that's kind of really nice for moving an ecosystem forward, and I thank you. Nothing else to add.
Thanks you guys. All right, well, I think we're all done for the day. So bye, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.